Wouldn't have it any other way. All right. The Battle of New Orleans is really the entail to the War of 1812. It's really accumulation of not a very successful campaign, really, for either side. But by the time we got to the Battle of New Orleans, the War of 1812 had been going on for nearly 3 years. And we hadn't had a lot of success. And I want to make sure that you understand, we talked about the Battle of Lake Erie and the Battle of Lake Champlain. These are happening at the same time, basically, that this Battle of New Orleans is going on. So without those victories, to our knowledge, we haven't had a very good War of 1812 at this point, okay? Now, while the fighting was going on in the north of Lake Erie and Lake Champlain, the British strategy in the south was to capture the port city of New Orleans. If they could get access to New Orleans, they would have access to the Mississippi River, and the plan was basically to join forces with the British victories here, which they assumed were coming, which did not, and squeeze the American frontier. Okay, that was the goal. Now, Andrew Jackson, General Andrew Jackson, was the man that was ordered to protect the port city of New Orleans from this British assault. And the federal government gives him the word that he's the guy. His Tennessee militia is closest to New Orleans. He's really the only one in the area. And the federal government promises him 2,000 well-trained regular army soldiers that will meet him in New Orleans, because he's going to march his men from Tennessee down to New Orleans, and he's going to be joined by 2,000 regular army to fight the British at New Orleans. Now, Jackson had about 1,000 militia with him from Tennessee. So the two combined forces are going to amount to about 3,000 soldiers, okay? So Jackson's going to be joined at New Orleans by 2,000 well-trained regular army soldiers. They're going to meet him in New Orleans. He's going to combine them with his approximate 1,000 Tennessee militia, and they're going to protect the port city of New Orleans. Well, Jackson gets down to New Orleans, and he's surprised because he gets joined by some other help. He gets some more help. Waiting there for him are approximately 2,000 militia from Kentucky and Mississippi, who are going to join him in this defense of New Orleans. So when he gets to New Orleans, he's joined by 2,000 militiamen, approximately, from Kentucky and Mississippi. Also joining the cause will be approximately 500 men from New Orleans that'll come up and help him. Approximately 500 men from New Orleans are going to come up and help him. He's also going to get approximately 500 free blacks that had just gained their freedom in Haiti, which is in the Caribbean. They're going to come to New Orleans. About 500 free blacks are going to come and provide their assistance. And then there's going to be a group of Choctaw Indians. A group of Choctaw Indians that are going to join also. So he's going to have 1,000 of his own militia, 2,000 militia from Kentucky and Mississippi. That's 3,000, right? About 1,000 combination of free blacks and men from New Orleans and Choctaw Indians. And then the 2,000 he's going to be getting from the federal government. So he's going to have a force of about 6,000, okay? He also received some unexpected support from a French pirate by the name of Jean Lafitte. Jean Lafitte. So, does not sound like it's, or spell like it sounds. Jean Lafitte is a French pirate that's going to assist Jackson already. What he's going to be is an intelligence officer for Jackson, to provide him intel. Okay, he's going to be an intelligence officer to provide him intel. Well, he's also going to give him 3 other things, or supply Jackson 3 other things that Jackson would have not been able to get on his own. Very important things. So Jackson runs into a French pirate by the name of Jean Lafitte. He's going to serve as Jackson's intelligence officer against the British at New Orleans, but he also supplies him with these 3 things. A bunch of gunpowder. A lot of gunpowder. Also going to supply him with flints for his muskets, the rifles. That's the thing that charges the spark that ignites the gunpowder and sets the projectile up. Flints. And he's also going to supply him with cannonballs. Now, unfortunately, those 2,000 well-trained regular Army soldiers that were to meet him in New Orleans never arrived. So he's down to about 4,000 men. Now that might seem pretty good, except he's going to be outnumbered by the British 2-1 because they have almost 10,000 men that are going to be assaulting New Orleans. So he's at a big disadvantage, but yet he's kind of like a coach. He gives a big pep talk and tells his guys, hey, we can win with half the strength if we do it right. And he convinces those 4,000 militia, free men, citizens of New Orleans, Choctaw Indians, that they could win. Well, the British are going to be under the command of Sir Edward Pakenham, who was very well respected British commander, and he led the British to that victory over Napoleon. So the British are going to be led by Sir Edward Pakenham, and Pakenham was very, very well respected, and he was the man that commanded the British to the victory over Napoleon. Sir Edward Pakenham. Well, on December 23rd of 1814, December 23rd of 1814, the British landed south of New Orleans and camped on sugar plantations there. On December 23rd of 1814, the British camped south of New Orleans on sugar plantations. Well, I'll tell you what, you're going to learn a lot about Andrew Jackson in the next few weeks. He's an unbelievable character. One of my favorite presidents. Not because he was good politically, because he was just quite the character. Now, he isn't going to mess around. Despite the fact that he's outnumbered 2-1, he goes on the offensive right away. And he orders his men to attack the British forces at night. So he goes on the offensive right away, and he orders his men to fight and attack the British forces at night. Does that give you any kind of a What's the odd thing about that? Come on now. Jefferson took the offensive.
Isn't it against the war code?
Yeah. So he's not following the rules of war. You're not supposed to fight at night. You only fight in the day. That's why everything you ever watch on TV says, we'll attack at dawn, when it gets light. Well, Jackson doesn't do that. And this fighting at night is a very foreign concept to British soldiers because rules of war prohibit fighting unless it is light out. So what Jackson's men do is they attack these British camps at night in a twofold effort. The men attack at night, but he also has a ship docked in the Mississippi River that's lobbing cannonballs into their camp as well. So as these cannonballs are being lobbed into the British camp from a ship docked in the Mississippi River close by, his men are attacking the British soldiers at night. Now it is pitch black, and there was no moon to provide any lighting of any kind. So it was an absolute free-for-all, and Jackson was using what we term today as guerrilla tactics. Not gorilla, but on your ID sheet, guerrilla tactics. And these tactics included his men using rifle fire, use of rifle butts, clubbing people, swords, knives, fists, pistols, and they even resorted to strangling hands. I mean, this was a free-for-all. They went in there and they shot at him, and they stabbed at him with swords, and they hacked at him with hatchets, and they hacked at him with knives, and they punched him, and they hit him with rifle butts. They even got to the point of strangling them with their own hands. It was guerrilla tactics at its best. No semblance of order, or rule. Well, after this night assault, Jackson gathered up his men and he ordered them to build a great big wall fortification made out of earth and wood. And they're going to put this fortification halfway between the British and New Orleans. Okay? And they're going to build this big earthen fortification. Now what they're doing, it's kind of interesting because they're going to first of all dig a big moat. You know what a moat is? Big ditch. And it's going to be 10 feet wide, and they're digging this and throwing the dirt up against the bank and making a fortification, and then they're going to put logs up to even fortify it more. But they're digging this 10-foot wide moat right in front of their fortification. And what do you think they're going to do with that moat? To keep the British from getting up to their fortification area. They're going to fill it with water. That is a swamp area. You got the Mississippi River right there, right? And so they're going to have a nearby drainage canal that they're going to flood this thing, and they're going to have a big fortification halfway between the British and New Orleans. They're going to be in the middle with this great big moat in front, 10 feet wide, filled with water. Okay, picture that in your mind. Well, to go back, for 4 straight days and nights, he attacks the British at night, digs the fortification in the day. Attacks the British at night, digs the fortification during the day. Does that for 4 straight nights. And finally, the British have had enough, and they send him a nasty note telling him how ungentlemanly-like it is to fight at night and violate the rules of war. So, toward the latter stages of this 4 days of fighting and digging, unhappy with General Jackson's night assaults, the British send Jackson a note informing him how ungentlemanly he is for fighting at night. So what does Jackson do? He sends a note back telling them how ungentlemanly they are to occupy American soil and asks them to go back where they came from. So they have a little spar here, okay? They didn't text each other because we didn't have phones in those days. They sent messengers with notes. Well, that's going to take us to our next subtopic, which is American victory at New Orleans. And I want you just to know that we're going to break this up into 3 separate assaults that the British take upon New Orleans. And on your essay question, it's going to ask you to explain all 3 assaults. Okay? So we're going to start with assault number 1. This is what happens. Picturing that the British are at their camp on the sugar plantations, New Orleans is a ways off, and who's right in the middle? Jackson and his fortification he has built with the water moat in front. Okay? So, on December 28, 1814, December 28th of 1814, what British Commander Pakenham does is he orders his men to fire Congreve rockets towards that fortification. Okay? Pakenham orders his men to fire Congreve rockets into the sky toward that fortification. Now, do you guys remember what the purpose was of those Congreve rockets for the most part? To do what?
Fire.
Yeah. How are you going to start a dirt mound on fire that's got water in front of it? But he didn't do it for that purpose. These guys from Tennessee, Mississippi, and Kentucky, these Choctaw Indians and these guys from New Orleans and these freed blacks had never seen a Congreve rocket in their life. So what's his purpose of sending these Congreve rockets? Scare them away, thinking, my God, what are these things? And thinks they'll retreat back to New Orleans just by the sight of these Congreve rockets. That was the idea. Pakenham believed that these firework rockets would frighten General Jackson and his men to retreat because they had never seen one. If you never saw one of those before, how would you know what they were going to do, right? I mean, in those days, that was like something you just never saw. Well, the American reaction to the rockets was kind of interesting. The men said that they, quote, looked rather pretty and didn't faze them in any way, shape, or form. So, when the Congreve rockets didn't scare them off, the British fired their cannons and their muskets or rifles from a long distance away, and did that for 3 hours. Pounded Jackson's fortification with cannon fire and musket fire for 3 hours. No positive results at all for the British, so Pakenham withdraws and forms a new plan. That's Assault 1, right there. That is Assault 1, okay? Congreve rockets don't scare them off. They start shooting cannonballs in there and musket fire for 3 hours, figure out it's not going to work, move on, okay? Second assault. Now, Pakenham was reluctant just to march in there because he thought the casualties would be very high. So what he did in the second assault on January 1st of 1815, he brought in bigger cannons from their Navy ships that were docked and began to open fire again against the fortification, hoping to destroy the wall. So what he does on the second assault, because he doesn't want to march troops in there, is he gets bigger cannons from his Navy boats, brings them in, and starts firing again into Jackson's fortifications. Well, General Jackson decided after taking a pounding for a while, I think we'll just fire back too. So they loaded up their cannons and fired back toward the British camp, which again was located on a sugar plantation. Well, what were the Americans using to protect themselves from British fire? This huge dirt and log fortification. What do you think the British were using to protect themselves on that side?
Nothing.
No, somebody actually got this last period and I was just shocked.
Sugar cane.
Close. Barrels of sugar. They lined up these barrels of sugar and got themselves behind those. Okay, very good. Lined up these barrels of sugar. The problem was American cannonballs hit those barrels of sugar, which fired sugar all over the place, including all over the British cannons, which were warm from firing cannonballs, and the sugar melted and gummed up all their apparatus, their firing area, the holes that they needed to have air to fire, all that kind of thing. It melted, ended up in the breeches, the firing holes, it gummed up the cannons, and the second assault ends with that. Okay, believe it or not. Isn't it amazing what happens in history? I mean, it's amazing. So they blow this sugar all over these British cannons. They're hot, they melt, they gum up the firing breeches and the firing holes, and that's the end of that assault. Which brings us to the third and final assault, which is, what do you think he has to do now, Pakenham?
Frontal assault.
He's got to have a frontal assault. Now understand though, before we get into this, that marching your soldiers into battle and ordering them to attack or fire are two different things. They first of all got to march close enough that their muskets would do any good, right? So keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. So the failed bombardment during the second assault by the British led to Pakenham's decision to lead a direct march at the American fortification. And this happened on January 8th of 1815. Now you picture this. You are one of Jackson's men behind the fortification. You are watching 10,000 soldiers march at your fortification. And you are basically horrified, or you're watching in fear, because they've got more than twice as many as you do. Okay? Well, before the British got close enough in which their muskets would do any harm to Jackson's men, he ordered his men to fire cannons upon the British that were marching, waiting for their orders to attack. But he didn't put cannonballs in the cannons.
Grape shot.
What?
Grape shot?
What's that?
Grape shot?
What do you mean?
It's like basically shotgun. It's like a load of all these small...
Well, they didn't have such thing. They put scraps of metal in there. And it was like shrapnel. You know what shrapnel is? When a bomb explodes and the metal goes nuts? Well, he was not even waiting for the bomb to explode. He was just shooting shrapnel. pieces of metal. And this was mowing down redcoats hundreds at a time. Hundreds per shot. Be like Jaden said, shooting a shotgun at somebody. The pattern gets bigger, more people hit. Well, even though his men were dropping, British Commander Sir Edward Pakenham ordered his men to continue their march, and they were not given the order to attack until he thought they were close enough, and the way he was going to signal them to attack was he was going to shoot off another Congreve rocket. And when that rocket went off, because of the dust and the smoke and the noise, then those British soldiers would know it's time to start firing. Because what have they been doing this whole time? Marching to get in position. And they're getting mowed down with this shrapnel cannon fire. So Pakenham gave the order that his men were not to attack the fortification. Now why would he have them wait? Because he had men up in advance trying to get ladders into what? The moat. Because there was no way they were getting up. So he actually had ladders made, and he had soldiers in the advanced stages of the march that were to get up there and get those ladders in the moats. As soon as the ladders were in the moats, he was going to fire the Congreve rocket and tell his men to attack. Okay? That was the plan, and he was going to do that. Well, the smoke is so thick, Pakenham cannot see the American fortification very well, and thought the ladders were in place. So he fires the Congreve rocket, and his men begin their assault or attack, but there are no ladders in the moats. Well, Jackson's watching this, and even though his sharpshooters, his men want to shoot immediately, as you probably would if these guys were coming at you, he told them to wait till the